Hey, all right, I am back. We're here once again from the bowels of my palatial estate in Brentwood, New Hampshire. Coming to you from H.E. McMahon's Pub, where we are riding out the coronavirus lockdown of 2020. So today's topic, guitar modifications, specifically bass guitar modifications, specifically this bass guitar modifications. Modding guitars, obviously, it's wicked cool. You buy a guitar, it's like, oh, that's a cool guitar, but I think I could make it better. I want to make it look better. I want it to play better. There's no limit to what you can do when you're modifying guitars and basses and whatnot. So this is currently my go-to bass from about, you see from here up. From here up, it is a 2010 Squier vintage modified 77 jazz bass. I'm a big fan of Squier basses. I've had 4 Squier basses, I guess, still going back to the 80s. My first bass was a made in Japan Squier precision bass, which I regretfully sold. The thing was fantastic. And it would have been worth a lot more money than what I paid for it back in 86, I think. Yeah, big fan of Squier basses. You've got guys who buy the Squiers, they sand off the logo, and they put they get the water slide decal so it looks like a Fender bass. The technical term for these people is douchebags. If you're playing out, no one's going to judge you by the logo on your bass. They're going to judge whether you can hold down a groove and play your damn instrument. If they're judging you by the logo on your bass, there's a technical term for those people also. Those people are known as douchebags. Squier basses are just fine, they're great. That's not to say all Squiers are created equally. Anyone who's looked at guitars, played guitars, specifically the Squier line of guitars, knows that there's a hierarchy, there's a pecking order, a definite ranking in quality of Squier guitars. The Squier made in Japan, Strats and basses from the 80s, those were excellent guitars. The Chinese Squier Affinity series is really not worth bothering with unless, hey, get one for your kids, see if he likes playing guitar, see if he likes playing bass. The quality is just, it's considerably less than the Vintage Modified series or the Classic Vibe series, or even the Standard series Squiers, the Indonesian Squiers after they were Japan and Korea, and then most of them are now made in Indonesia. But they're perfectly good instruments, a few bucks less than Mexican Fenders. Anyways, what happened to this Squier bass was it started as a Squier bass, but as anyone who knows me knows, I'm a major Rush nerd. Rush is the greatest rock and roll band that ever graced the face of the earth. I'm still mourning the loss of the Professor. That was a tough one to take. Then again, I'm still mourning the loss of Stevie Ray Vaughan, and that was 30 years ago, so I don't get over some things. Anyways, Squier Vintage Modified 77 from here up. From here down, this is what I call my poor man's Geddy Lee bass, or my Ghetto Lee. Biggest change, obviously, went from the black stock pickguard to the pearl pickguard. I'm a sucker for pearl. I love pearloid pickguards. Extra touch here, the little amalgamation decal from his Clockwork Angel's jazz bass. It was his 72 that we switched to the pearl and got the with that engraved fancy thing on it there. The pearl block inlays. This is the replacement neck that's from his 72 jazz bass. You only refret a bass so many times that neck gave way. So his number one, I believe it's his number one now, has the pearl block inlays. So what we have here is an affordable version of the made in the USA Geddy Lee signature jazz bass. Not quite the same thing, but it plays great. I'll kind of run down what's been done to it. Some of this was done by the previous owner. I bought it used off of Facebook. I paid $200 for this with a Roadrunner soft case after some of these mods had been done. Biggest thing right off the bat that you noticed that had been done was the high mass bridge. This is the Goto high mass bridge. Here's the standard factory Squier bridge, and you can't see it in the video here, but much beefier bridge. It's not as big as the Fender High Mass or the Badass bridges, but that was a nice touch. So it came with the High Mass bridge already on it. Might switch that out eventually with the Leo Quan Badass. Maybe not. The pickups had been replaced from the Squier factory pickups to Fender. I believe these are Fender Original Jazz pickups. CTS pots were added. CTS pots, if everyone's familiar with them, they're the good size, the larger pots. Squier factory pots, this base ships with the little dime-sized pots, which frankly is insulting to dimes because these are smaller than dimes. So you want to know why you're paying less for a Squier? It's these dinky little tiny little pots they put in there. One of the reasons. There are many reasons, but that's one of them. So I found the Pearl pickguard guitar parts online. I should put a link in the video. Look in their clearance section. I think it's just guitarpartsonline.com. They have a clearance section, and I picked up Jazz Bass Pearl pickguards for $1. And last time I checked, they still had them. That's $1 for a 3-ply Pearl pickguard. That's not bad. So I replaced the pickguard, obviously, and that's something to note. If you're going to be replacing the pickguard on a Squier, or replacing the pots on a Squier, one of the things you need to know is these little dime-sized Squier factory pots come installed in the plate, the control plate on the Squier, which has little tiny holes to match the little tiny shafts on the pot. The replacement control plate I got also had the smaller holes on it that the CTS pot shafts wouldn't fit through. Those need to be 3/8, I believe. So those had to get all drilled out to 3/8. So you're going to do a little extra drilling, but you're just drilling holes. The holes are already there. You're just making them bigger. So that wasn't too bad to deal with. The other thing to note, and I'll set this down so I can show you, is when you are looking at aftermarket Jazz Bass pickups, pickguards and control plates, you can see this is the Squier factory and this is the Squier factory control plate, goes this way. And there's a notch, you see the little triangular notch where the control plate fits into the pickguard. That's just the Fender design. You can see on these two it lines up pretty nice because it has the pointier shape on the point of that goes into the pointier notch on your pickguard. If you are buying an aftermarket pickguard, you may have to, while you're on the site selling the aftermarket pickguards, and I think these say it fits imports and Mexican Fenders and imports. Not that any of that matters. Get the right shape. Your drill holes aren't going to line up anyways. 1 or 2 or 3 of them will line up. I've never replaced a pickguard and had all the drill holes line up. But if you're going to buy your pickguard, to upgrade your pickguard on a Jazz Bass from that same site, you might need to get the control plate. So you'll notice this is the upgrade, or this is the replacement pickguard in Pearl. This is rounded here. This notch is a little more rounded. And if you try to run with this pickguard on that factory plate, it's not going to line up. You can't really see. Hold it up there. There's a gap. It's a gap. It doesn't fit in the notch because that's pointy and that's rounded. So just something to keep in mind. So this was 10, 14, 12 bucks or something like that. So super budget friendly. And then you can see on here, you can see that notch, that slightly rounded notch, and on the pickguard and on the control plate, they line up really nice. If you are replacing dime-sized pots, these factory pots with CTS pots, the housing on them is considerably larger, and the cavity in your guitar may not be large enough. And if you don't enlarge the cavity when you go to put this in, your plate's going to it won't fit in the cavity. It's going to shrink back. There's going to be a bigger gap there. So it's just routing out the cavity. It's not that big a deal. Simple. And that's about it. That's about all I've done on this. If you're going to be upgrading to a high mass bridge, because this base plate is so much thicker, the saddles are taller. You may find that when you go to set up your string height, you put these saddle screws all the way down to the deck. and your strings are too high because you put a high mass bridge on and it's taller. So I did have to shim the neck. Shimming the neck's not a big deal. Just, don't be afraid to, everyone's like, oh, I don't want to take the neck off. What if I mess it up? It's screws and wood. It's just, you take it apart, you put it back together again. If you mess it up, you take it apart and you do it again. So just things to be aware of if you're going to be going into it. It's super simple work. You don't need any fancy tools. The result is, I like the way this came out because I'm really, really far from being able to play like Geddy Lee. That's not going to be an obtainable goal of mine. But the bass looks super cool. It plays really nice. I love the neck. It's got binding on it. So it's got the white binding on the neck, which is a super nice touch. My other Squier bass, which I'll have in another video, I'll do a side-by-side. That's a Squier standard P-bass special, which is the P-bass with the jazz pickup on it. That's a 98, but I'll do another video with that one. But this is my poor man's Geddy Lee jazz bass. If you are going to be, again with the pickguard, your holes don't line up. If you have to drill new holes for the pickguard, 2 tips for that. If you're putting a hole right next to an existing hole, just drill the hole out with 1/8" bit, fill it with a piece of 1/8" dowel, hardwood with glue, let that dry. You want to have, your screw needs to have solid wood around it, or it's just going to tear through the little bit of wood between the 2 screw holes. So you may have to do some drilling and filling on that, which I've always had to do. When you're drilling the holes, if you lay the pickguard out, especially on a P-bass where you got that long piece of the pickguard that comes way down here, if you lay it out and you drill all your holes, Murphy's Law says that by the time you get to that last screw, the hole isn't going to line up. So lay your pickguard down, drill a couple of the holes, get the screws in, and then kind of drill it and screw it in as you go. So that last hole, especially on the P-bass, that last screw down there, don't want to drill that in ahead of time. It will never line up right. Maybe I just suck at drilling the holes, but I always find if you wait until do that last hole last, that way all your holes will line up. The worst thing is getting all your holes drilled, then you put your pickguard on, you realize that your screws aren't lining up. Then your screw goes in at an angle, or you got to re-drill it, now your hole's too big. So, handy tip, use that if you want. Ignore it if you want. But yeah, so the result is pretty cool. Nice looking bass. And doesn't cost a lot of money. Like I said, Craigslist, Facebook, that's the place to go. So $200 for the bass with the case. That was $1. The control plate was, I think, $13 or so. So super short money if you can find the deals, they're out there. And a really, really fun bass to play. I put Rotosounds on it, swing bass, because Geddy plays Rotosound swing bass. Jury's out on those strings, not sure if I like them or not. My other bass, I just put D'Addario's on it. Jury's out on those. I find the Fender bass strings, I like the Fender strings. They're not too bad, but I'll do a whole thing on bass strings and in the future. So anyways, that's it. Hope you enjoyed my video. I'm going to go have a cocktail now and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.